Hey everyone, Digital Scriptorium here, and today I want to show off how to install Fedora Linux Workstation 43 from start to finish. I'm just going to give a few details before we dive in so you know what you're getting yourself into. This guide is intended as a general use case installation of the operating system. I'm going to show off system requirements, how to create the bootable media, how to install the operating system, and then a general tour of the operating system at the end. I won't be going into specific application usage as that is outside of the scope of this guide today. All the links I show off I will include in the description below so you can easily find them if need be. One disclaimer I just want to mention is a warning that this is an operating system install guide where I completely remove the previous operating system. As is with any operating system, you might run into unforeseen issues. So you have to go into this with an open mind that issues might spring up. Worst case, you can always attempt to install a different operating system back on. If you need help, I have many different Windows and Linux guides to accomplish this on my channel. Also, be sure to back up any data you might need before starting. Before I begin, I also want to mention that if you are feeling generous, to think about donating to support my channel on either Ko-Fi or Patreon. Every bit goes right back into making new guides. Alright, with that all said, let's dive into it. Alright, so let's start with the system requirements. Now this is going to be a little wacky because I actually have to reference two different system requirement guides on Fedora's documentation. The first one that I'm showing off is their latest documentation, which all it really mentions is that you need a 40 GB SSD disk and 4 GB of RAM is recommended for Fedora Workstation. And it does mention, however, it is possible to use hardware with lower specifications. However, it doesn't mention anything about the processor, and that's why if I jump over to the other one, then it's basically saying that you want a 2 GHz dual-core processor or faster as a reference. So jumping back to the other one, basically you want 2 GHz dual-core processor or faster with 4 gigs of RAM or more, and at least a 40 GB solid-state drive for space. And it mentions that it's for x86 64-bit processors or ARM-based 64-bit architectures from Intel, AMD, and ARM. Now, one thing that other Linux distros usually mention is the minimum screen resolution that is a requirement. And in my opinion, if you just have a screen that is 1280 by 768 or better, then you should be in good shape. Anyhow, let's jump over to downloading Fedora Linux 43's ISO image. Now, at the time of making this video, Fedora Linux 43 is still in a beta form, and it's perfectly fine to install the beta version, as once the official stable release comes out, it would just upgrade to that stable release. So you don't have to wipe your machine and redo it and all that good stuff. So anyhow, if version 43 stable has been released, look for the number 43 right here. You would click on this, and then you would select your variant that you want to download, whether it's Fedora Workstation or KDE Plasma Desktop. You have the two options to download from within here. Like I said, at least the timing of this video, I'm going to just download the beta version to go over things, and all the steps are going to be exactly the same during the installation process. And like I said, if 43 still has not come out, then download the beta, install that, and like I said, it will self-update to the stable release when it does come out. Then this is where you can download it. So you got Fedora Workstation 43 Beta, or you got Fedora KDE Plasma Desktop 43. Choose the one that you're going with. In my case, I'm going with the Fedora Workstation 43 for the sake of this video. And then here's where you're going to have your different options to download from. Most users are going to choose the 4 Intel and AMD x86 64-bit systems. However, there is the ARM-based version, as well as the PowerPC little Endian variant that you could also download. If you click this little clipboard, this is a checksum file that you can run against the download to make sure that the checksum actually matches. I'm not going to go over this for the sake of this video, but I just wanted to mention that in case you do want to go down that path. Anyhow, I will click the download button, and then we'll wait for that to download. We'll continue on once it's done. Alright, with my download now complete, we're going to jump over to create a bootable USB thumb drive as the installation media for the operating system. Now you do have a few options. For one, there is the Fedora Media Writer tool that you can use. The downside to that is that you do have to install it, and you may need dependency applications installed as well on top of it. Or you can also download something like Etcher, but that too requires installing and downloading potential dependency applications. Whereas Rufus, on the other hand, is a very basic, very small, self-contained executable which does not require installation or anything of that sort. And so Rufus is what we're going to use today. Now, unfortunately, Rufus's website does have some clickbait if you're not using ad blockers. So if we scroll down to about a third of the way down the page, locate this download section that mentions latest releases. Now there's going to be a number of different options to choose from within here. Most users are going to choose this top variant, which is the standard Windows x64 variant. There's a portable version, which I still have not been able to figure out why anyone would actually download the portable version, since the top variant that I'm mentioning here doesn't require installation to begin with, so it seems pretty portable to me. And then there's the Windows x86 variant if you're on a 32-bit version of Windows, and then if you're on Windows on ARM, there is the Windows ARM 64 version. Anyhow, we're going to click on the latest and greatest standard Windows x64 one, at least for this video, and then we will continue on once that is done downloading. Alright, so with Rufus done downloading, I'm just going to click the little download folder here. Obviously, if you're not using Edge, then you can just go into your downloads folder in general in File Explorer down here. So I've got both Rufus and I've got my ISO image that I've downloaded. Now there's a few things that we need to work some magic on. And at this point we can close out of the web browser that you have open. Like I said, just keep your downloads folder open as we're going to be going through some steps utilizing Rufus and all that good stuff. So there's two things that we want to adjust. The first one is going to be changing up your Windows autoplay settings. We're going to turn autoplay off. However, if you want to turn it back on after the fact, you certainly can. The thing that I've seen is that while Rufus is building up the USB thumb drive, sometimes autoplay will kick on and try to start indexing the files as they're being loaded on the thumb drive, and that can cause corruption. So let me show you how to turn off autoplay right now. So if we go down to the start menu, click on that, and then type in auto, and then usually it shows us autoplay settings that we can choose. If not, type in the full word of autoplay, all one word. You're going to see this toggle for use autoplay for all media and devices. Just toggle this off, and then we can close out of that. And like I said, if you want to toggle it back on after running through the Rufus steps, that's perfectly fine. So next up is going to be Windows Defender's real-time protection. The problem with the real-time protection feature is that a lot of times it falsely flags Linux distros installation files as being malicious. Now these are all false positives, but the problem is that as it writes the data to the USB thumb drive, then real-time protection jumps in and starts pac-manning the files. It starts eating them as we're trying to put them on the thumb drive. And a lot of times Rufus won't notice it and it will say that things completed successfully. Meanwhile, at that point, the operating system installation files on the thumb drive are now toast. So anyhow, I'm going to run you through the steps of temporarily turning off real-time protection. Like I said, keyword is temporary. This buys us about 15 to 20 minutes of having real-time protection turned off. So what's going to happen is either the 15 to 20 minutes are going to run through and then it's going to turn itself back on automatically, or if you reboot your machine, whichever comes first, it will turn itself back on automatically. It's not destructive in any way. So let me show you those steps right now. So if we go down to the start menu and then type in security, then we should see Windows security as an option. If not, type in Windows space security, click on that, and then look for the virus and threat protection section and click on that, and then look for the virus and threat protection settings section and click on manage settings. And then you're going to see this real-time protection portion, and then we can toggle the on to an off. Select yes for the UAC prompt, and then we're going to see a pop-up on the bottom, which we can click the X for, and then we can close out of that. So at this point, go ahead and plug in a 4 GB or larger USB thumb drive. If you don't have a USB thumb drive on hand and you're looking for a recommended one to use, I will have a link in the description below for an inexpensive name brand one that should get the job done. So I'm going to plug my USB thumb drive in right now, and then we will continue on with the steps. Alright, so my USB thumb drive is plugged in. Let's double click on Rufus. Select yes for the UAC prompt. The first thing we need to make sure is that our USB thumb drive is in fact being detected. I've got a 128 gig thumb drive that is showing up here. If for some reason it is not showing up in this section, I would recommend unplugging the USB thumb drive, give it about 3 to 5 seconds, and then reseat the thumb drive back into a USB port. Make sure it's firmly in there. If it's still not being detected, it may be worth trying a different USB port on your machine. If your thumb drive is still not showing up, leave the thumb drive in the machine and reboot your machine and see if it then will be detected. If it's still not showing up, if you go to this PC and then locate your USB thumb drive, if it's detected in this section, right click on it, select format. One thing just to warn you is that this is going to nuke the data on the thumb drive at this point, so just make sure you back up any data that's on it before you continue on. Anyhow, you would leave the quick format toggled on. You can name the volume whatever you want. You can name it data or something like that. Click on start. It'll warn you that it's going to destroy the data on the drive. As it formats it, you would select yes or okay for that. And then within about 5 to 10 seconds, the drive would be freshly formatted and hopefully will show up in Rufus for you. At that point, if a USB thumb drive is not being detected, just try a different USB thumb drive and hopefully that will make the magic happen. Anyhow, moving on, thumb drive is being detected. So now at this point, we can click on the select button. Let's click on that now. And then locate where you downloaded Fedora's ISO image to, and then select that, click on open. And then I leave everything as is at this point. I let Rufus decide the best options to choose, and then we will click on start. And then before we click on start, just another warning that it is going to nuke the data on the USB thumb drive. So if there is any data that you need on your USB thumb drive, please back it up before you continue on, as it's going to blank it during the formatting process. Anyhow, I don't have anything on this thumb drive, so I'm going to click on start. It's going to mention that there's an ISO hybrid image detected. We will leave it on the recommended option, click on OK. And it's going to mention that a download is required. For grub, let's select yes for that. And then it's going to warn us that the data is going to be nuked, just as I'd mentioned. Click on OK once you're ready for that. And then at this point, we just stand back and wait for this to crunch along. Depending on the speed of your USB thumb drive and the USB port, it usually doesn't really take that long, but if it's an older thumb drive, it could take some time. In my case, mine didn't even take a full minute to build up the thumb drive. But anyhow, the key thing is that we see a green ready state. If you got any errors along the way, I would for one make sure that real-time protection is in fact turned off, along with autoplay being turned off, and then I would just try again. If you're still getting errors, it might be worth re-downloading the ISO image, and then if you're still getting errors after that, then it might be worth trying a different USB thumb drive. So at this point I will click on close, and then next up is kind of, in my opinion, the most difficult portion to getting a different operating system on a machine, and that is determining what key or keys you need to press to get your machine to actually boot off of the thumb drive. Different makes and models reference different keys to get your machine to actually boot. So my recommendation is just Google your exact make and model, or if you built your machine, then I would recommend looking up your exact motherboard manufacturer and version, and then that should point you in the direction of what key or keys you need to press to get it to boot off of the thumb drive. In my case, I'm using a Lenovo desktop, which at least for this model of it, is the F12 key. So I'm going to plug my USB thumb drive into the machine that I'm going to nuke now, and then we will continue on. And a warning at this point that this video is going over completely removing the old operating system and data on the machine, doing a complete clean slate. So we're nuking all the data on the machine and installing just Fedora on it. So if there's any data you need to back up, please do so now, as once we get going and we hit the certain action point, it's going to delete the data. So back the data up now before you continue on is my rule of thumb. Anyhow, at this point, I'm going to plug my USB thumb drive into the machine that I'm going to put Fedora on, and then we will continue on. And I'm mashing the F12 key right now for my machine at least. Now once again, every make and model is going to be different in how they show some sort of a screen to select a thumb drive, or some models might even just have an option that is literally just booting off of a thumb drive and it immediately boots to it. Anyhow, in my case, mine I actually have to select my boot options. I'm just going to arrow key down, but basically if you do get a menu, look for something that says USB HDD for USB hard disk drive, or it may even say USB thumb drive, or it might even say USB virtual CD drive. If it's really confusing, then you may also be able to spot it based on the manufacturer of the thumb drive. So in my case, mine's a Samsung drive, so I definitely know that is it, and it also mentions it's a flash drive. Anyhow, I'm going to click enter at this point to select that, and then you may see this screen, and we'll just let this run through. And then I'm going to mash my F12 key one more time, because I do have to select the thumb drive one more time. And now you also notice that things have slightly changed. Now we actually have Fedora showing up here as an option. And that's what I'm going to choose now. So I'm going to select Fedora, hit enter, and then I'm just going to use the up-down arrow keys just to show that we have a number of different options here. So by default, it wants to test this media and start Fedora Workstation Live. However, you could skip the test and just jump to starting Fedora Workstation Live. Or you can also go to troubleshooting, which gives you a bunch of different options you can choose from. Anyhow, I'm going to just select the default option, and if you didn't tap your up or down arrow keys, then after 8 seconds or whatnot, it would have selected this anyhow. So I'm going to click enter, and then it should start doing an integrity test of our thumb drive. And we'll just give this a moment to crunch. Once again, this completely depends on the speed of your USB thumb drive and the speed of the USB port that it's plugged into. And in my case, mine went right through the media detection stage without any issues, so that's good. If you do get any errors along the way, it may be worth trying a different USB thumb drive to see if that helps. Anyhow, at this point we are in what's called a live CD environment or live environment, and that means that you can actually test drive the operating system before you install it. The downside is that anything you download, save, or configure on the operating system at this point will not persist through reboots. You also take a performance hit as well, as it's not actually installed on the machine. But anyhow, we are going to go through the steps of installing it and not just trying it out. But the first thing that we want to do before we click on install Fedora Linux is, my recommendation is to always have the machine connected to the internet during the installation process. I would strongly recommend, if possible, to have the machine plugged into an Ethernet connection. If either an Ethernet connection is not available because it's too far away, or your machine doesn't have an Ethernet port on it, then wireless is the second choice to go to. But Ethernet is the most solid connection of them all, and then wireless is the second option, but we'll still get the job done. So if you take a look in the top right hand corner, you're going to see the little network icon. This is all part of the same menu section, so no matter where you click on here, it's going to give us the same exact thing. Anyhow, you click in here, and then you're going to see potentially two options, one being wired if you have an Ethernet controller on your machine, and the other is the Wi-Fi option. So with the wired option, you generally don't have to do anything, and then you can, as long as it's plugged in, and then you can just continue on going down the steps that we'll do in just a moment here. However, for wireless users, hopefully your Wi-Fi toggle is showing up here. If it's not, go into your BIOS of your machine and turn off fast startup or fast boot. Sometimes the names can be different depending on make and models, but that can sometimes make it so that your Wi-Fi chipset does not initialize. That's also something to keep in the back of your mind, that after installing Fedora Linux, if wireless does not show up, again, double check that in your BIOS, fast startup or fast boot is not enabled. If it is enabled, disable it. Resolves weird Wi-Fi missing problems. So anyhow, to connect Wi-Fi, we click the little arrow on the side, and then you're going to see your different wireless networks to choose from. You would select your wireless network, type in the password for it, and then connect up to it. At least for the sake of this video, that's going to be partially blurred out, but just to show you how to work that magic. So anyhow, we're going to now continue on installing Fedora Linux. Let's click on that. Click on it one more time since it focused me onto that section, and then just be patient as it loads up. See this initializing screen. Alright, so the first thing that comes up is it asking for a language. Now for one, you can either scroll through here, or you can also search your language in the top section if you wanted to. Anyhow, I'm going to leave mine on English United States. That's fine for me. You also have the option to change your system keyboard layout if you wanted to. You can click on this, and it's going to give you different options to choose. For instance, you can change up your input sources and stuff like that. Anyhow, mine is perfectly fine. I'm going to click on next. Next up is the destination section. So just as I'd mentioned, this guide is going over just installing Fedora Linux as the only operating system on the machine. This is not a dual boot guide. At some point, I do want to create a dual boot video for users that are curious on those steps. But anyhow, for the sake of this video, we are going to do the single operating system path. So we're going to click on Use Entire Disk, which, just as it mentions, removes all partitions on the selected devices, including existing operating systems. So again, a warning, please back up your data before you continue on with this process. If you do need to back up your data, you can feel free to use the power options up here. Click the power button, select Restart, boot into the original operating system, back up the data, and then continue on in the video from here. Anyhow, we will click Next for this. And then you do have the option to encrypt your data if you wanted to. It's completely optional. In my case, I'm just going to leave mine as is and not encrypt my data, and I'll click on Next. And then this is a review and install screen, so it's mentioning what is going to happen. So it's telling us all the selections we've chosen, as well as all the partitions that are going to be deleted, and then all the new ones that are going to be created. And then this is just a little section that basically says, I understand that all existing data will be erased. So basically I'm accepting that risk. So now we erase data and install. We'll click on that. And then at this point, it should just start crunching, and fingers crossed it'll make it to the end. Now, if all goes well, we should see the successfully installed screen. If for some reason you get an error, I've seen sometimes where just for some random reason it errors out, just close out of the little error box, go back to the main page, and in the bottom section, there's going to be the Fedora logo with like a loading bar. And if you click on that, that actually initiates the installation process again. Go through the same exact steps, and then it will get past that. So if you do see any errors, like I said, just back out of it and then attempt the installation again. Anyhow, everything looks good, so we will click on Exit to Live Desktop. And just to show what I was talking about with a shortcut to initiate the installation process again, up in the top left-hand corner, click on that, and then here's that Fedora shortcut with the little loading bar on it. And as you see, it says Install to Hard Drive. You can click that if it fails for you. Anyhow, at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut the machine down. I'm going to then pull the thumb drive. So we'll go up to the top right-hand corner where there's the little power button icon. Like I said, it's a full menu in itself here, no matter which icon you press. And then select the power button, and then let's select a power off, and then let's pull the thumb drive like I said, just so it doesn't try to boot from it again during the startup process. So I've pulled my thumb drive and I'm turning the machine back on, and then we will continue on with the whole process here. And then after a few seconds, you should hopefully see the Fedora logo with the little spinny icon starting to load up. The very first time that it loads up, it could take significantly longer as it's still kind of building out files and stuff like that. So now we're at the second portion of the installation, and that is more fine-tuned configuring things. So again, it's going to ask you for your language. Once again, choose which language works best for you. There is the search option in the top. And one thing I should also mention is that if you, again, are a wireless user, just go up to the menu in the top. Make sure, again, that you are connected to a wireless network before continuing on. Anyhow, everything looks fine for me here, so I'll click on Next. There's the keyboard layout section that you can change up if need be, and you can also do a search for keyboards if you wanted to in this section. I'll click on Next. And again, if you have not connected to a wireless network, then you have the option in this section as well. We'll click on Skip. Now, both of these settings are completely optional. I recommend you leave location services on, but I'm going to turn off the automatic problem reporting. But once again, completely up to you on what you want to choose. I'll click on Next. Next up is the time zone configuration. You can actually click on the map and it will set your time zone based on what you click on the map, or you can do a search for cities and that will also fine-tune where your time zone is. So I'm just going to leave mine as New York. That's perfectly fine for me. I'm going to click on Next. Now, the third-party repositories is something I do recommend you have turned on for the best user experience. This is also kind of a confusing step because you're always questioning, if this says enable third-party repositories, does this mean that it is enabled currently? However, it is actually not. If you see it say enable third-party repositories, it actually is disabled. So click on that, and when it says disable third-party repositories, that means it's enabled, if that makes sense. Again, it's completely optional, but like I said, there's a lot of proprietary software, drivers, stuff like that, that this helps with. So I will click on next. Now it's going to ask us about who we are. So type in your name in this section, and it's going to populate the username. I'm going to delete the scriptorium portion out and just have it as digital. However, one thing also to mention is that there is an enterprise login option that you can choose down below here if you have like a domain and all that good stuff. But anyhow, this is all consumer on my end, so I'm just going to leave it as is. One thing also to mention is that you can choose your user account's little avatar or whatnot. So let's click on that, and I'm going to choose the happy little tree there, and then we'll click on next. And then you'll want to type in a password in this section. My recommendation is type in something strong, and it's also going to mention how strong the password is down below here. So for instance, if I typed in something very strong, then it's going to mention that basically it's a very strong password. And then if I delete this out and type in something that's not very strong, it's going to turn red and it's going to mention that it's a weak password. For this guide, I'm actually just going to type in a weak password, but I do not recommend that you do that. And then one thing also just to mention is that you can do the show password toggle if you want to, in case you want to see the actual characters, but I'll click on next. And it's going to mention all done, Fedora Linux is ready to be used. Click start using Fedora Linux, and I'll click into that. And then you're going to get the pop-up asking if you want to take a tour. In my case, I'm going to click skip for this, but once again, completely optional if you want to. But anyhow, at this point, the operating system is now installed, so you can dive in, feel free to start playing around with things, take a tour of your own if you wanted to. But one thing I do want to mention is that I'm going to show my own little tour right now, in case you want to see kind of some areas that I jump into and stuff like that. It's not going to be a super deep dive, but I'll go over some areas and some little tips and whatnot to some areas that I feel can be adjusted and things like that. So anyhow, with that said, I will continue on with that now. Alright, so let's start in the top right hand corner, which we've gone into a few times now already in this video. However, we'll do a little more of a deeper dive. So we'll click onto that. So over on the left hand side, you're going to see this little camera icon. If we click on this, this is your screen capture app that is built in. By default, it's set to the selection or area selection, to where you can choose what area you want to actually make the capture from. And then you can choose the whole screen if you wanted, or if you have multiple apps open or a specific window open, you can choose window and you'll be able to select which window you want to take the capture from. Also, by default, it is set to the take screenshot. However, you can also record your screen. That you'll notice that the little record button is changing colors depending on how we toggle between the camera and the video record section. So they both have the same exact options. It's just whether or not you want the camera or you want to do a video capture. There is also the option to show your pointer or turn off your pointer as well. So we can close out of that. And then once again, top right hand corner. Next over from that is going to be this little gear, and this is your settings. If you click in this, then this will load into your settings page, and we'll go into more detail on this as a whole once we get further on in the video. But for right now, we'll close out of that. Back to the top right hand corner. Next over to the right is the lock button. So this means that you can lock your screen if you wanted to walk away, but you wanted to keep your applications open. So if you had a bunch of applications open on the screen and you just want to walk away but have your machine secured, then all you have to do is click the lock. You'll see the lock screen come up, and then if you click into it, you'll be able to log back in. So once you're ready to log back in, then type in your password and hit enter. And once again, top right hand corner. And then over to the right, to the furthest right, is the power button. And that's where you're going to have the option to suspend, restart, power off, or log out of the machine. And then below that is your volume slider. So that's how you can adjust the volume of your speakers, as well as you can also mute your sound if you wanted to. And if you click the mute button again, then it will unmute it and it should bring it back to the sound level that you had previously. If you have an Ethernet controller in your machine, you're going to see the wired section here. If you click the little arrow, it's going to give you some more options, such as showing you've got a wired connection. You can also disconnect it if you wanted to. And then there's also the option to jump to your wired settings, which just jumps you directly to the wired section instead of going through the main gear settings option. And then if you have a wireless chipset in your machine or wireless dongle, then you would have the Wi-Fi option. And if you click on this, then you're going to have your wireless networks that are within range that you can connect to, as well as you can also click on all networks, which will give you a broader, detailed section to look at. And then to the left again, but below wired, is the power mode. So this is the power options that you can choose. My recommendation is to leave it on balanced. Now the reason as to why I say I like to leave it on balanced, because when I need performance, it usually dips into more of a performance mode, or if there's not a whole lot going on and the machine's basically running idle, then it kind of dips more into a power saver mode. However, that's not to say that if you need raw performance at all times, you toggle the performance mode on, or if you're really trying to conserve power, like you're a laptop user and you're trying to make the most out of your charged battery as you can, then you can choose power saver. The downside to power saver is it's going to make your screen brightness go down. It's going to decrease the performance of the machine, but obviously you're trying to get as much life out of your battery as you can, so that just have to go into that with that mindset. And then below that is the power settings, which will get you into the main power settings page. We'll close out of that. And then there's the night light option, and this is just going to decrease the blues of your screen. And then there's also the dark style or light style option. So if you click dark style, then it turns on dark style, and then if you unclick it, then it's the light style. It's a little bit difficult to see with this toggle, but if you may have noticed with the background, with the light mode, notice how it's kind of brighter, and then dark mode, it decreased the brightness of the sun or the rocket engines or whatnot. Anyhow, I'm going to leave mine on dark style as we continue on, but completely optional if you want to change it to back to light style and all that good stuff. Anyhow, there is a do not disturb option, so this is going to make it so that certain notifications and stuff like that will not pop up while you have this turned on. I'm just going to turn that off, but that's the gist of the top right panel options. If we go to the middle of the screen, you're going to have your date and your time, and if we left click in this, on the left hand side is the notifications pane, so if there were any notifications, they would be queued up in here. Also, if you have a bunch of notifications that you want to get rid of, then you could clear them and that will bring you back to a clean slate. The right hand side is going to give you a bigger breakdown of the calendar. You can choose months, you can also choose years and all that good stuff. If you set any events for a particular day, then it will show up for today's events. You can add world clocks, and you can also select a weather location as well. So we'll close out of that. And then on the left hand side, this is how you can show the system tray or system dock in the bottom, as well as also see a search field if you wanted to search for a specific application. For instance, if I wanted to find terminal, then I can just type in terminal and I can select terminal from there, or whichever app you're looking for. This also gives you the option of being able to jump between different desktops. So currently there are actually 2 desktops that you can choose. So if you had a bunch of applications open, or maybe one application open on this desktop screen, you can jump to this one, which currently does not have anything open. You could open another application over here, and then you can quickly jump between your desktops if you wanted to view different data or whatnot between the different applications. Also note in the top left, I'm on the furthest right desktop. So currently we are on the right. And then if I jump to the left, you'll see that we are on the left. So this is another indicator on which desktop we are on. And again, if you click into the desktop, it'll zoom you in. And then if you want to see your tray or dock, then you can just click the button and it will zoom you back out. So starting now in the bottom, let's go to the bottom left. So by default for Fedora, it comes with Firefox as your browser. Now, even though it comes with Firefox, it doesn't mean it has to be your browser. You can install Chromium or Brave or some other browser of your choosing, but this at least gives you something to use from the very beginning. And let's just go through the basic steps of configuring this. I'm not going to import from anything from the previous browser. I'll uncheck that and click Save and Continue. You can personalize Firefox if you wanted to by adding extensions. If you click that, I'll click Skip this step. Sync your data across devices, so if you wanted to sign in to Firefox, then you would be able to pull in bookmarks and passwords and what have you. I'll just click on Start Browsing, and then we're in. So like I said, if you've never used Firefox before, this is going to get the job done for a browser, but if you wanted some other browser, like I said, you can feel free to download one and then change up the browser that's in your dock. So I'll close out of that, or it'll crash and close out for me. And if something does crash, you can always try to restart the app, or you can quit it. You can also choose different options on if data is being sent and whatnot. But here, I'm just going to click Quit Firefox, submit the report. We'll close out of that. So next, over on the right is the calendar, which just gives you an even larger calendar to be able to set events and things like that. You can toggle between dates. You can change it to week view instead of month view. And it also gives you a bunch of options to do search for events. There's a menu, and then on the bottom right, there's also a number of different things that you can choose. So just to show that off, let's fire that back up. So then over to the right of the calendar is going to be your files. So if we pop this open, let me just double click up here so it maximizes it. So by default, it's going to bring us into our user account's home folder. So this data that is in here is bound to the user account that you created. So in my case, this is my digital user account's data. If there's another user account on here and they're logged in, they would not be able to see my data without my credentials at least. Anyhow, one thing just to mention is once again, there is a search feature. If you wanted to search specific folders or files or whatnot, you can type in something up here, go back to home. And then below home is recent files. This is a fresh install of the operating system. There's no recent files here as we haven't really gone into anything. There are starred files. So this is where you can basically favorite files. This gives you a one-stop shop to be able to jump back to files that you favorited. Below that is network. So if there's any devices on the network that are discoverable, then you would find them in here. So for instance, if you have a NAS or a network attached storage device, it might show up and whatnot. Also, if you notice down below, you can also manually search for host names or machine names or IP addresses and connect in. It'll prompt you for credentials. You can connect into them that way. Below that is trash. If there was anything in the trash, then we would see it here. Then it would give you the option to either empty the trash or restore the documents that are hanging out in the trash. And then below that is documents. We don't have anything at the moment, but also notice that as I'm hovering over documents, it shows home digital documents. So it's actually showing the full file directory path of where we are in case you ever need to reference that. And then below that is music, pictures, videos, and downloads. It's all pretty self-explanatory. I'll close out of that and we'll pop the tray back open. So from files to now software, let's click on software. And I'll maximize this. So software is basically the app store in Fedora. This is a nice one-stop shop to where you can download various applications from within this instead of having to search the internet for them or jump in the terminal and manually download and install them that way. So there is a lot of stuff in here. This is also where you can pull in a different web browser if you wanted to, but there's a lot of different things to choose from, and there's also all sorts of categories. So for instance, there's other categories at the very bottom that you can choose instead of the create, work, play, develop, learn, and socialize stuff. One thing also to mention is there is a search option in here. So if you click in the magnifying glass in the top left, you can search for specific applications. Like for instance, you may want to install Steam. So just type in Steam and then it should search for it, and then there's Steam that you can download. But obviously you can type in all sorts of stuff and it should hunt it down for you. So by default, it's set in the Explore section, but if you click on Installed, this is going to show you all the apps that are currently installed on the machine, and you could potentially uninstall them if you wanted to. It's got system apps as well as along with add-ons. And then to the right of that is actually updates. So we actually have a number of updates currently, which is probably the reason as to why Firefox actually crashed on us. Now for this video, I'm going to skip over this because it's going to take a little bit, but I do strongly recommend that you download the updates and install them. Anyhow, we'll close out of this and we'll go back to the top left again and we'll fire this back up. And then next over to the right is a text editor. So this is just everything you expect out of a basic text editing software. Very basic, but we'll get the job done. Close out of that. And then over to the right of that is your calculator app. So everything you expect out of a calculator. You can change it from basic to advanced financial, programming, keyboard, and conversion if you wanted to. Close out of that. And then finally, over on the right is the Show Apps section. So this is going to show you every single app that's on the machine. One thing also to mention is that Fedora does come with the LibreOffice suite, so that's pretty snazzy. There are also subcategories such as utilities and system that you can choose from. I'll click the Show Apps again to get out of that. And I just want to show some things real quick before we jump into the settings. So if you right click on the desktop background, then you have the option to change your background, change your display settings, and then jump into settings. So this is another area where you can jump into settings. And then if we get the dock to reappear, if you right click into the dock, then you do have the option to select like a new window for an app, or you can unpin it, and there's also app details. And with the pinning being mentioned, if you were to go to Show Apps and you right click on a specific app, then you can pin it to your dash so that it would show up down here. So for instance, if you installed a different web browser and you're planning to not use Firefox, you could unpin Firefox and then you could pin whichever browser you're going to use down to that section below to make it easier to use. Anyhow, let's jump into the settings at this point, and I'll maximize this. So first off, again, there is a magnifying glass if you want to search for a specific setting. If you have a wireless chipset in your machine, you're going to have the Wi-Fi setting actually showing all this information. You can toggle your Wi-Fi on and off, you can connect to a hidden network, you can turn on Wi-Fi hotspots. You'll see your visible networks in this section. And then below that is network, so this is going to be if you have an Ethernet chipset on your machine, you're going to have these different options show up. So you can toggle on and off your network connection. There's greater network options if you were to go into there, which dives into more DNS related stuff and all that good stuff. You can set up a VPN, change up proxy configurations. And then if you have a Bluetooth chipset in your machine, then it will give Bluetooth options in here for syncing Bluetooth devices, turning Bluetooth on and off, things like that. Unfortunately, I do not have a Bluetooth chipset on my machine, so that's why it's not displaying in here. But it's pretty straightforward for the settings that it does have. Next up is displays. This is where you can change up your screen's orientation, your screen resolution, refresh rate, the scaling, as well as turning the night light on and off in this section. And then below that is sound. So this is just going to give you greater configurations for sound, as well as also showing any mic input devices that you might be seeing, along with volume levels, alert sound. Then you can also test your sound as well up here. Next below that is power. So once again, here's the power mode that I was discussing earlier. There's the option to change up what your power button behavior is. By default, it's set to suspend, but you can choose power off or do nothing as well. There's also the power saving options. So for instance, automatic screen blank is currently turned on, and then how long is it going to take for the automatic screen blank to kick in, and that is 5 minutes. One thing to mention for desktop users is that you may not want automatic suspend turned on. I'm going to actually turn it off. However, if you're on a laptop, you may want to keep it turned on, and you may even want to change up the amount of time it takes for it to suspend, or I should say go to sleep. But maybe you're also a desktop user who's perfectly fine with your desktop going to sleep. If it's idle, then you can turn that back on, whichever you want to do. Below power is multitasking. So there's a number of different multitasking configurations that can be changed up. For instance, hot corners, active screen edges, and if you scroll down, then there's all sorts of other different options that you can feel free to tinker with. See if it's something you want to turn on or off in there. Below that is appearance. So this is how you can change up your light mode or your dark mode. There's accent colors you can change up. So you can change it to like orange. As you can see, it's kind of changing the little border around things here. I'll just keep mine as orange, as I like that. And if we scroll down, then you also have the option to change up your backgrounds. And then if you wait, then it will populate the different backgrounds that are pre-installed on Fedora. You can also feel free to set a picture if you wanted to, or go with one of the available options for Fedora in here. I'll set mine to this just to switch it up a little. Anyhow, below that is apps. So once again, there is a nice little search bar at the top. If you're looking for a specific application, you can change up your default apps, especially if you change web browsers. You may want to go into this section and change up Firefox to whatever you downloaded, as well as it gives the option for media auto starts and then what to do if those specific media types are kicked off on the machine. We'll go back, and specific applications will also have different settings. So if you go into audio player, for instance, it may not necessarily have a huge amount of settings besides notification stuff. But then if you go down to Firefox, then it has a few more options in here. So every app may be a little different in what it might give for options. And then below that is notifications. So here are the current applications installed on the machine that will actually give notifications. As you install more stuff, and if they have notification capabilities, they may show up in here. But also there's the do not disturb, toggle on and off, lock screen notifications, stuff like that. Below that is the search settings. So for one, app search is turned on. So when you actually are doing the search, it's also looking for applications on your machine. You can change up search locations. You can also manually toggle on and off specific apps if they can be searched or not. And then below that is online accounts. So if you wanted to connect an account of one of these kinds, then you can choose these and set them up and all that good stuff. I'm just going to scroll down a little bit here. And then below that is sharing. So for one, you can change up your device's name in this section. So this is the device name or host name. And I do recommend toggling the little pencil icon and change it to something a little more unique than this, but again, completely optional. There's also the option to turn on file sharing and then also media sharing as well, which by default are turned off. Below that is well-being, so you can see your analytics for the usage of screen time and all that good stuff. You can actually set limits, you can set daily limits, and there's a bunch of other configurations that you can toggle on and off in here. Feel free to tinker. Below that is mouse and touchpad. So this is where you can adjust your mouse and touchpad configurations, and you can also test a setting. Below that is keyboard. So this gives you another alternative option if you may have accidentally chosen the wrong input source. You can change it up in this section, or if you just want to add something else, then feel free to tinker in this section. There's a whole bunch of different options to choose from. Below that is color management. So this is where there's color profiles. So if you're tinkering with any monitor color profiles, you may want to play around in this section. And then below that is printers. So if you had any printers, they would show up in here. By default, no printers are loaded, but you can always add a printer. Before you add a printer, you do have to unlock it, in which case it pops up asking for your credentials, and then you can go through the steps of adding a printer. Below that is accessibility. So if you need to change up any of the accessibility options and select the specific categories that you see here, and then go through those steps. Below that is privacy and security. So there's screen lock, location, file history and trash, diagnostics, cameras, and device security. And then below that is system. So you have region and language configurations, date and time, users. If we click in users, this is actually where we can alter our current user account, but you can also, if you unlock it, add a user account, or you can add enterprise login configurations here after the fact if you did not do that during the setup process. There is also the option to toggle on automatic login. I don't recommend you do that, but some people may want to just automatically have their machine log in when they power the machine on and whatnot. And here we'll go back. And then below users is remote desktop. If you wanted to use remote desktop, there's secure shell for SSH network access. And then there's the About section. If you click on About, this just gives you another option to change up your device name, aka host name, as well as it mentions what operating system version you're on and the hardware for your machine. This is the basic information that's showing, but if you select system details, it will give you more information. There's also the option to donate to support GNOME if you wanted to. Go back here. And then there's another section for system updates. If you click on that, it's just going to jump you into the little app store there, and then you can do the download and all that good stuff. The other thing also just to mention is that you can also refresh to double check that it actually is pulling the latest and greatest updates in case you want to make sure that it's actually snagging everything. And then you go through the steps of clicking download and go through all the installation stuff there, which again, I do strongly recommend for bug fixes, security fixes, and improvements and stuff like that. So close out of that, and then we close out of that. So that's all you need to do to install Fedora Linux 43 Workstation from start to finish. If you found this video to be useful, please like it and subscribe to my channel to keep up with my latest video happenings. I also invite you to check out my channel if you haven't already, as it has many interesting guides and many more to come. Anyhow, until next time, take it easy.